Have you heard people saying things like classical, modern, or even hypermodern in the world of penciling? Today I'll tell you exactly what they mean. Here's the raw definition. Classical means there are more than 0.75 rotations per trick, modern is less than or equal to 0.75, and more than or equal to 0.3 rotations per trick, and hypermodern is less than 0.3 rotations per trick. These definitions were put in place in February 15, 2023 by Void in his white papers, and recently updated in May 2024 by me after talking with Void. But what does this actually mean? This might sound a little technical, but fear not, I'll break it down in simple terms. So basically, when we spin pen makes circle. Now let's count how many times it makes a circle. This is the rotation number. In other words, one rotation is 360 degrees. With this knowledge, you can now count how many rotations are in a penciling linkage. Let's practice this right now. Count how many rotations are in this linkage of tricks. How many rotations was that? Let's go through it together. In the first position, let's track this side. As the sonic continues, the side goes up here, which is half of a rotation notated with 0.5. Next, the pen continues to rotate another half rotation, completing a full rotation, because the side we are tracking is at the starting position again. As the pen continues, we note another full rotation by this point, for 2.0 total rotations. By this point, the pen makes another full rotation. Then, by the time we finish, it has made 4 total rotations, notated by 4.0. So that takes care of the rotation part of the rotations per trick. Next, let's go to the trick part. This is probably the most confusing part of the entire thing, and there have been several debates about what constitutes as a trick, but I believe I've settled on a decent definition. First of all, what actually is a trick? To know what a trick is, we'll have to look a little into basics of penciling notation. A trick is the bare fundamental aspect of what makes a piece of notation. In simple language, as an example, a sonic is one trick. But where things get a little confusing is hybrids. A hybrid is a combination of 2 or more tricks, where one or more is partially interrupted. When counting the number of raw tricks, we try and notate the trick in its simplest form without spamming finger switches or charges. So how many tricks is a single side sonic? A side sonic is actually 2 tricks because it originally comes from a normal sonic, being interrupted by an inverse sonic. Notating a side sonic like this would mean its simplest form without using finger switches. If we notated finger switches, then the number of tricks would increase massively without reason. If this is still too unclear to you to what constitutes as a trick, then we could use the full finger switch theory, which I developed earlier this year. If you want to understand it, then you can read this if you want. But in most cases, this is probably overkill, and it's most likely much easier to just count the number of tricks. So how many tricks is this? Well, the first trick is pretty obviously a sonic, so that's 1. Next is a twisted sonic, which is another. Then finally, we have a neoback, which makes this linkage a total of 3 tricks. Now that you know how to count rotations and how to count tricks, you might be wondering, how does this actually apply to classical, modern, and hypermodern? Well, that's where the final part, per, comes in. Per completes the phrase to be rotations per trick, meaning for every one trick, there are X many rotations. Now let's go back to the definitions. Classical means there are more than 0.75 rotations per trick, modern is less than or equal to 0.75, and more than or equal to 0.3 rotations per trick, and hypermodern is less than 0.3 rotations per trick. Now does it make sense? It's basically trying to measure how dense a linkage is, classical being the least dense, and hypermodern being the most dense. An example of a classical linkage would look like this. A similar linkage but made modern would look like this. The same linkage hypermodernized would look like this. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, feel free to check out my other ones too. See you next time.